So, we're diving into something pretty heavy today. It's been all over the news lately.
Yeah.
Ghost guns.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
We're talking about, you might have heard about this recent thing with the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson.
Right.
Tragic. And the suspect, Luigi Mangione, was found with something that they're calling a ghost gun.
Right.
And so I think this has sparked a lot of conversation.
For sure.
So we're here to kind of unpack what they are, why there's such a big concern, and then what's being done about them.
Yeah, it's a really, really important conversation to be having, especially now with this case. It's kind of put a spotlight on a trend that's been on the rise, and it's something that law enforcement's been worried about for a while now.
So let's start with the basics.
Hmm.
What is a ghost gun? I mean, it sounds like something out of, a movie or something.
Right, it does. It has a certain like mystique to it, but when you get down to it, a ghost gun is basically a firearm that doesn't have a serial number.
No.
So no serial number. It's like trying to track a car without a license plate. You can't tell where it came from, who it belongs to, or anything.
So it's really tough to track. And I know that our sources say that another big factor here is that there are no background checks required.
Right, and that's a really big deal because it means that these ghost guns are becoming increasingly they're appealing to people who wouldn't be able to legally buy a gun otherwise. So we're talking about convicted felons, people with restraining orders against them, people who, for whatever reason, wouldn't be able to pass a background check.
So how do they even get made? Like, are we talking about like some super secret, back alley operation or something?
Well, no, not really. And that's kind of that's part of what makes this whole thing so concerning is
No.
that there are two main ways that people get these ghost guns. One is through kits that you can buy online. The other is through 3D printing technology.
3D printing guns, is that even possible?
It is, yeah. It's a little bit more on the it's a newer method. It's a little more technically challenging. But it is possible and it's a growing concern for authorities.
So like someone can just get like a kit delivered to their house.
It's almost like that, yeah. Like, imagine getting all the parts you need to build a gun delivered right to your door. It's like a deadly Lego set. And that's really what it comes down to for a lot of people. It's almost like a hobby.
Wow. But what about the suspect in this case?
Right.
We were talking about Luigi Mangione. So was his gun 3D printed or was it a kit?
So in this particular case, they actually believe that his firearm was 3D printed.
Interesting.
But, for the most part, most people and especially criminals are still kind of going with the kits because they're easier to assemble. They tend to be, I guess people see them as more reliable.
Well, and our sources do mention that the suspect's gun may have jammed during the shooting.
Right.
So is that a common issue with ghost guns, especially 3D printed ones?
Well, it's definitely something that investigators are going to be looking into as part of the ballistics testing to confirm whether the gun they found, this 3D printed pistol, was actually used in the crime. But it does point to a potential, I guess, difference in the quality. When you have a kit that uses parts that were manufactured for commercially manufactured firearms, you tend to have a bit more quality control.
So with all of these concerns with these ghost guns, what's being done to kind of combat them? I mean, it seems like the name suggests that they'd be pretty hard to track and to regulate.
Well, yeah, you're right. It's a really difficult problem, but there have been some efforts to address it. In 2022, the Biden administration actually implemented some new regulations that are aimed at closing that loophole.
Okay.
The one that we were talking about earlier, the loophole that allows people to buy these kits without a background check. So the new rules actually require serial numbers and background checks for the kits.
So that's good, right? That's going to be a step in the right direction.
It is. It is. But the question is, will it be enough? Criminals, they tend to find a way. They're pretty resourceful. And so, they'll figure out a way to get around regulations. And of course, the whole rise of 3D printing, that just throws another wrench in the works. So it's kind of like playing, whack-a-mole. As soon as you think you've got one problem solved, another one pops up.
So, I mean, you mentioned earlier how hard it is to track these ghost guns, but do we have, any idea how many are out there?
Honestly, that's one of the biggest challenges. It's really difficult to get a good sense of how many of these guns are actually out there. I mean, the ATF, they have reported a pretty significant increase in the number of ghost guns that they've recovered in recent years. I think in 2021 alone, they reported over 20,000 suspected ghost guns.
Wow.
And that was a tenfold increase from 2016.
That's crazy. But that's just the ones that they know about.
Exactly.
Who knows how many are actually out there?
It's a little scary to think about, isn't it? I mean, when you consider that, between 2016 and 2021, over 45,000 ghost guns were actually recovered from crime scenes. That's nationwide. So that gives you some sense of the scope of this problem.
So what about at the state level? Are there any states that are trying to do anything about this?
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually seeing more and more states taking kind of a proactive approach. I think there are about 15 states now that have implemented their own regulations regarding ghost guns.
Okay.
And California's actually been one of the leaders in this. They actually require serial numbers and background checks, even just for the parts to build these guns.
So it seems like there's at least some awareness of this problem and people are trying to do something about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a recognition that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. But of course, there are always legal challenges. This is a very, very complex issue. And, the Supreme Court is actually currently reviewing the Biden administration's regulations. There's a case called Garland v. Vanderstock.
Right. And the outcome of that case could have a big impact on the future of ghost gun regulation. So there's still a lot of uncertainty surrounding this whole issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
But with all of the regulations that have been put in place, like, have there been any signs that any of it's working?
Well, it's still really early, but we are starting to see some glimmers of hope. There's some early data coming out of some jurisdictions like places like New Jersey and Washington, D.C., that suggests that the number of ghost guns that are being recovered at crime scenes has actually decreased since the new rules went into effect.
Well, that's good. That's got to be encouraging.
It is encouraging, but,
Yeah.
again, it's very early. But I think it does offer, just a little bit of optimism in what is a very, very complex and challenging situation. It shows that, taking some sort of action, whether it's through legislation or even just raising awareness, can potentially make a difference.
It seems like we've barely scratched the surface of this whole ghost gun situation.
Right.
And we started with that tragic case in New York City, and the mayor, Eric Adams, has been really outspoken about this issue. And he's calling for even more action to be taken against ghost guns.
Yeah, and I think, what's going to happen with the Supreme Court case. I mean, how are advancements in technology going to impact this whole thing moving forward? I mean, those are some of the questions that I think are going to be really important as we move forward. It really does make you think, it makes
Yeah.
you kind of weigh the different sides of this whole thing.
Well, and, our sources talk about this whole hobbyist angle,
Yeah.
like people who are legally building their own firearms,
Right.
maybe for the challenge of it or just because they enjoy it.
And that's a big part of this whole debate.
Yeah.
Right. You have folks who are saying, "Hey, look, this is my right. I'm exercising my Second Amendment right. This is a hobby, it's been around for a long time." And they feel like they're being unfairly lumped in with criminals, right?
Right.
When, the vast majority of these folks are law-abiding citizens.
And it is legal to build your own gun as long as you're not selling it without a license.
Right.
So it's like where do you draw the line? Where's that line between freedom and safety?
It's a tricky situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you write a law that keeps guns out of the wrong hands, while still protecting the rights of people who are responsible gun owners? I mean, that's the million-dollar question. And then you add 3D printing on top of all that.
Yeah, talk about a whole other level of complexity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. You're talking about a world where potentially anyone with a 3D printer and an internet connection could build a gun
In their house.
right in their house. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you regulate that? Do you try to control the sale of 3D printers? I mean, do you try to monitor these online communities where people are sharing blueprints? I mean, it's a slippery slope, It's really hard to know where to even start.
And then you add the global element into it.
Yeah.
Like even if we, crack down here, someone could just order parts online from somewhere else.
Exactly. It becomes an international issue, right? So you need some sort of global solution, but getting everyone to agree on something like that is a pretty tall order.
It feels like we're almost trying to like put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
Like, once the technology is out there, especially something like 3D printing, it's almost impossible to control.
I think that's a really good way to put it. And it really highlights why this conversation is so important, right? Like we need to be thinking ahead. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
Yeah.
Instead of waiting for, the next horrible thing to happen, we need to be thinking about the future and coming up with solutions that can adapt as things change.
So not just reacting to what's happening now, but thinking ahead.
Thinking ahead. Exactly. Being strategic. Instead of just focusing on legislation, we need to be investing in research, in development. We need to have law enforcement, policymakers, tech experts, all these people working together, right? Collaborating to try to find solutions that are creative, that are going to last, that are going to be effective.
So almost a whole new approach to this whole problem.
Yeah, I think so. I think we have to recognize that we're in a new era. And it's not enough to just kind of tweak the old laws. We need to fundamentally change the way we think about gun control in this digital age.
It's a huge undertaking,
It is.
but it seems like it's just too important to ignore.
Yeah, you can't just say, well, that's technology. There's nothing we can do. The
Right.
stakes are way too high. The potential consequences are too awful to even think about. And that's what I hope people take away from this. The future of this whole issue isn't set in stone. We can change it. We have the ability to influence it, to make it something that's safe, that's secure for everyone.
Wow. It's definitely made me realize how much I don't know about this whole thing.
Yeah.
It's so much more complicated than I ever imagined.
Oh, it is. It really is. But I think that's what's so cool about doing these deep dives, right?
Yeah.
It forces us to think about these complex issues, to challenge what we think we know, and to realize that there's always more to learn.
And it makes it feel really urgent.
Yeah.
Like this is not something we can just wait to deal with.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely not. This is something we need to be talking about now. We need to be, pushing our leaders to take action. We need to be educating ourselves so we can be part of the solution.
Absolutely. And knowledge is power,
Yeah.
especially when there's so much misinformation out there.
Yeah.
The more we understand about this, the more we can advocate for real change.
So we've talked about the complexity, the challenges, potential solutions, even kind of some philosophical questions this all brings up.
But what do our listeners do? Like what's the big takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this is not a static situation. This is something that's constantly evolving, and it requires our attention.
Yeah.
It requires us to be actively engaged and thinking about it. It's not enough to just be aware of the problem. We've got to be part of the solution.
And finding that solution isn't going to be easy. It's going to take people working together, thinking outside the box, challenging how we've always done things.
Exactly. We can't rely on the same old strategies to solve these new problems, right?
Yeah.
It's about being creative, being open to new ideas, and being willing to, experiment a little bit and learn from our mistakes.
And most importantly, speaking up.
Yes.
Like contact your representatives, make your voice heard. Let them know that you want them to do something about this.
You're absolutely right. This isn't just a job for politicians or law enforcement. This is something that affects all of us. It's going to take all of us working together to really make a difference.
So how do we do that? How do we work together? What can our listeners do to actually get involved? So, I mean, we've talked about a lot, haven't we?
Yeah, we really have.
This whole deep dive into ghost guns,
Yeah.
Started with that case with Brian Thompson.
Yeah.
That was really what brought it all to light.
Yeah.
And then we kind of jumped into the legislation, the technology, how hard it is to regulate.
All the challenges, the legalities.
Yeah. And I think one of the big things for our listeners is this isn't just something that's, happening somewhere else. This has real consequences.
Absolutely. Real world consequences.
Yeah.
And we all need to be aware, and we need to be, kind of engaged in this whole conversation.
Right. And we talked about, staying informed, contacting your representatives, supporting organizations that are working on this. But, beyond those things, do you think there needs to be like kind of a bigger shift?
I think so. I think there needs to be almost like a mindset shift.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for so long, this whole gun control debate has been so polarized. People just kind of digging their heels in and not really listening to each other. I think moving forward, we need to approach this whole thing with a little more nuance, with more empathy. Try to understand where other people are coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in, the emotions and the rhetoric.
Yeah.
But if we want to actually find solutions, we got to be willing to talk to each other. you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. Find some common ground. And I think with all the challenges and the uncertainty around this, there's some reason to be hopeful too. I
Yeah.
mean, we're seeing more and more people becoming aware of this, you know?
Hmm.
They're having these conversations. They're demanding action from their leaders.
So it's complicated, it's multifaceted, but it's not impossible. We
Exactly.
can change things.
We have the power to change things.
Yeah.
We can make this world a little bit safer, a little less, likely for these kinds of things to happen.
And it all starts with us.
With us, with all of us, yeah. Having these conversations, educating ourselves, speaking out, you know, making sure that our voices are heard.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the conversation doesn't end here.
No, not at all. This
Uh,
is just the beginning.
It's ongoing.
We have to keep talking about it. We have to keep pushing for change.
Yeah. It's about creating a world where, technology is used responsibly, where we balance the rights of responsible gun owners with the safety of everyone.
Hmm.
Maybe someday ghost guns will just be a thing of the past.
That's the goal, right?
That's the goal. Well, hey, thanks for being with us on this journey. We hope this deep dive is giving you some things to think about.
Yeah, hopefully it sparks some curiosity,
Yeah. Inspired you to do something. Remember, your voice matters. So keep the conversation going. Keep pushing for change. And let's work together to make things a little bit better, a little bit safer.